And maybe before we proceed, I just need to give people an opportunity to say what they would like to say, or we just go forward with where we were. What would be the best way for people to want to take this forward? We just proceed. Okay. So we were on the on the terms of reference, and again, I mean, I just want to say that's where we're sitting. Maybe then we need to discuss this as we were discussing them and see which ones are acceptable and stay, and which ones would be people would like to take out. Maybe that's what we do at this point. Can I ask you?
No, can I ask that on the other screen we go back to the initial agreement where those initial no, is that on?
Yeah.
No, on the other screen.
That's it.
But can you show the part where it talks about the terms of reference? But anyone can.
Charmaine, I think they want you to scroll it down to the next page.
Yeah.
Next page.
But people can, I just wanted to be able to, while we're talking.
There, B1, 2, and 3, that's where it's reflected. Is that what you want?
Yeah.
The three.
No, I was not going to, I just wanted when people speak, I'm able to.
Okay, okay, to cross-reference.
Yeah, to cross-reference,
okay, can we pull this upwards then a little bit? And I think that's where we've landed thus far. Can we then discuss this and ensure that we are on? The one thing that was suggested though was that 0.4 or 0.5, 6, and 7 were as a way of unpacking number 4. So we don't necessarily need number 4 because that make recommendations on institutional culture appears to make recommendations on how the university might progress with respect to transformation, decolonization. So that's contained there. Is that the agreement that point number 3 gets taken out, or
Number 4 gets taken out.
point number 4, because the explanations were for point number 4.
Plus the...
But the word that is not captured in 5, 6, 7 is labor relations, so that needs to be added somewhere.
Yeah.
Though we can actually delete 0.6 because it's all in 0.4. And 0.5 is the adding part.
Yeah.
0.5.
Yeah, 0.5 is the adding
So
part.
we delete 0.6.
But Chair, the idea was to get the sequence right. So point 4 is to inform ourselves, point 5 is to invite constituencies, all three relate to the same thing, and then point 6 is to make recommendations. So point 6 and point 4 is really the same. We just moved 4 to 6 and then hadn't yet deleted it, but it's essentially covered.
I know, but it's a little differently worded, and I have to confess that as I sit here, I think we must stick with the words that we've got at the top. So yeah, we can keep inform and we can keep invite, but we must make recommendations as we've got it.
Okay, so we take out 0.6 and we move forward to number 5.
Number 6.
So 6
Number
becomes
6.
a little shorter. And sorry, yeah.
You just replace 6 with 4.
So you replace 6 with 4.
But we also want to say invite still. We still want him to invite
That-
constituencies.
Yeah.
That's
That
fine.
stays.
Yeah.
That stays. But we take.
Does it make sense? No?
Yeah. Okay.
And now take out 6.
And then you cut out that one.
It's gone.
Is that?
Yeah.
Does that make yeah.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's where we are at the present moment, right? Okay. I think still we've now just organized point 3. So I'd like us to start from the top and just go through everything and agree. So point 1 I think stays as is. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And point 2, invite submission from all constituencies on the clemencies. That also was part of what was already in the agreement. Is that okay?
Chair, I think there's a hand.
I will come back. Which point?
No, it's just the language of the point 1 where you've got look into, and the same way when we looked at the appointment of the commissioners, and we were just trying to tighten up in the language, is whether rather than saying look into,
Okay.
wouldn't it be better to say investigate the facts? I mean, if we look into what is referred to, would be to would it be problematic to say investigate the facts of the Shackville TRC protests? Would that be problematic? Rather than look into what is referred to.
Okay, Snokolo.
So again, for me, I mean, this is something that if you read 1 and 2 together, right? Now, just quickly, if you, from the point and make recommendations on how the university will deal with such matters in the future, for the purpose of this point that I'm about to make, now just scrap that quickly, and then you read 1 and 2 together. Can you please just do that, just quickly, and then you can undo it again. So, and make recommendations on how the university should deal with such matters in the future. Just strike that line. And then you read 1 and 2. I have got to ask myself the question, to what purpose? Right? And I'm sure this is what the commissioners would like to know as well. To what purpose are we investigating this? Initially, when the agreement first, when on where it says clemencies, right? When it was amnesties, it had assumed that amnesties were already given, and that the recommendations that we're seeking now is to what ends that in future protests. For example, if you're saying that the University Disciplinary Tribunal is problematic and doesn't have the capacity to deal with such issues, that was the purpose, right? Now, when you just say make recommendations for the future, I feel like it's too up there in the air, really. I think, so hence even when you say investigate the facts, why are the facts being investigated is the question that I would ask. When the facts were already established. So for me, I feel like on that particular point, if you just read them, they don't go anywhere, they don't move us anywhere. So I like us to just to interrogate. Perhaps let's just scratch that as it is and leave it there, and then we can see how the point is actually not substantive in any real respect.
So what do you recommend? Or you just want to leave it as it was? Is your point to not change the first few words?
Let's leave it as it is. We're leaving it without the structure, right? Yeah. So leave it as it is without the structure. With the structure. Just delete.
So
Do not delete that.
unchanged, yeah.
I'm saying.
So basically subtracting whatever you said.
No. Yeah. So yeah. So delete that.
No, don't delete it, isn't that what you mean? Yeah,
What?
like that, right?
Yeah. Delete.
I'm not sure what Snokolo is saying.
Huh?
I'm so confused.
I'm completely confused.
Are
you wanting what's highlighted to be deleted?
Yes.
You want what is highlighted to be deleted?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fine.
But why?
But he wants it temporarily, so just cross out, just
So he has-
strike through.
Why you want it?
Can you explain it? Because I'm struggling with myself.
So are you saying Snokolo then that point
you
1
explain?
and 2?
Yeah,
Okay, Kwesi.
I think I can try.
Okay.
Yes, I'll tell you when if
I
something's
think
got it.
the logic of and make recommendations on how the university should deal with such matters in the future, such matters, it opens up the same space of that term of reference of the future.
Something
Future
Yeah.
process. It
Yeah.
takes us back to that. So speaking in relation to, because again, it takes us back to actions made by students in relation to the institution, whereas we're trying to open up the space to speak about institutional culture,
Okay.
et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I'm trying to say.
Chair?
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know, but then my comment is to go back to the putting in of look into, because that was and to say to investigate. I would like to disagree with that, based on the fact that when you say investigates the facts, you going back to the narrow understanding of what Sheikh TRC was, which you already know. There were people that banned, those are the facts. Pictures were banned. The facts is that there was a shake up. But when you said look into, the idea was to not just look at the facts, but also look at the culture that made such actions possible. So if you reduce this to investigate the facts, you don't give space then for that kind of an inquiry. So that's why I would disagree with
Okay,
that
sure.
one.
So the wording remains.
I just want to say, I think it's really neither here nor there. On point 2, if we're deleting make recommendations on how the university should deal with such matters in the future, because actually I think that's what's going to happen about everything that the commission deals with. Surely they're going to make recommendations to the university about how to deal with all these things in the future. I mean, they're not just going to listen and then say this is what we heard, but they're producing recommendations. It will be about the future. So I think that is something that's going to be pertinent all round. And maybe should then just be its own point that the commission would be making recommendations.
Okay, you wanted to say something? What about that point then being its own point that underscores everything that gets done? Is that that's why I was...
I think my concern would be the fact that, like, the nature of protests and just the climate, all these things, they change over time. How they come up and how we deal with them, I think, there's a change to it. And my fear is that, let's say 10 years down the line, something comes up and then our university goes back to these recommendations, whereas sometimes it's just a time there's something that needs to change. So for me, I fear in that we're understanding kind of how protests happen, how to deal with them in this one position doesn't remove room for the fact that these things are going to change.
Yeah.
How protests happen, how we're going to have to deal with it. If we had an IRTC maybe 20 years down the line, they're not going to probably recommend the same things now. So that's why I'm iffy about that sentence. And like making a recommendation for the future, because knowing our university, then they're going to make policy about discipline for the next whatever years, and sometimes that's not going to be applicable for 10 years down the line. Then we're going to have another IRTC.
So is the recommendation, I mean, I think that there's a view that the IRTC may make recommendations anyway, but the recommendation from you is the recommendation basically just to take out that sentence and not have it at all?
I think I'm not going to answer that question. I think this house can discuss it. What I want to suggest is, in addition to that, after clemencies, there must also be a consideration of converting clemencies to amnesty. And I think that also balances out this idea of making recommendations on how you deal with subsequent protests, because it kind of balances out people's anxieties of like having a crackdown heavy policy. So if this commission decides to convert, if allow room for the commission to decide to grant clemencies into amnesty, that in turn can set precedent, or that becomes part of how you subsequently deal with protests in the future, because they'll then have to consider that amnesty as part of recommendations in the future. So I'm not suggesting anything in relation to scrapping out that last sentence, but I am proposing that there must be a consideration of converting clemencies into amnesty.
Okay, I don't know who was, I'm sorry, I can't.
All right, take Deborah first.
Okay,
She'll
okay.
speak
Deborah.
more.
I mean, we've got at the end, people are saying we've got to make recommendations. And I would just suggest that in the thing on the make recommendations at the end, we can say on conversion of clemencies into amnesty.
Yes.
So there's one clause that is about, and I think that the way that last thing is framed is broad enough that if they think the disciplinary system is part of the institutional culture, they can make recommendations on it, but we leaving it for them. Because I think Lorna's right. We're getting them to make recommendations. That's why we want them there. But
So-
we don't specify, so it gets deleted from number 2.
Deleted from number
And
2.
clemencies, conversion of clemencies into amnesties gets put in whatever that last number is.
Well, Madam Chair,
Okay,
on the question of conversion, I don't know, again, in the translation, we've lost other parts of the agreement. If on the agreement page, you just scroll up to page 2,
page 2.
on the left-hand side screen, go up to, it's just above B where it says 5. No, go up, previous page. There, 5.
Yeah.
This was what we said the IRTC would do. Will request submissions from all constituencies on the clemencies granted and make recommendations on the granting of amnesties or the continuation of clemency and what the nature of the amnesties should be. It's in the agreement. That should be captured in the same way. It's a different set of recommendations. I mean, that's a very specific thing, and that should be in Roman numeral, whatever it is on that side, I think. It shouldn't really be a separate clause. It relates to that. The clause that Simon, I think, and Sino are asking to delete, ironically, was a clause that I know that now various people are reading it as somehow anti-student or anti-protest, but let me just remind you of its origins. The origin was that the Vice-Chancellor has no power to grant clemencies or amnesties. And we may need to make recommendations to Council to change those rules, to give the Vice-Chancellor or someone some authority to grant it. And if you bear that in mind and now reread the paragraph, you'll see that what it said is that we're going to consider the clemencies, etc., and convert clemency and recommend any changes for how the university should deal with that in the future. The kind of changes we had in mind was not that we should go and clamp down on protest. That was quite a separate set of issues. It was about changing some of our disciplinary or our mechanisms that allow us in a political situation some greater flexibility to deal with that situation, which we haven't had in the past. Now, I'm happy for you to scrap that because I think that those submissions can still be made to the IRTC and they can still make recommendations. They will, but I have a sense there's this huge suspicion that things have been slipped in. These were the things that we talked about first, and they were mostly in our agreement. And I think they were there for progressive reasons, not for retrogressive reasons. So maybe based on that, you want to decide whether to delete it or not.
Okay.
It probably doesn't matter much because hopefully they'll make recommendations.
So can we go back then and see where we've deleted? Invite submission from all constituencies on the clemencies granted, and I think there was something that...
Yeah, you should copy across from that 5 there. And make recommendations
And
on the
make
granting of the...
recommendations.
There was actually something similar in the,
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Invite
Yeah.
submissions from all constituencies and clemencies granted, whether extended or turned into amnesty, and what should be done about pending disciplinary cases.
Yeah, well, that we've now put the pending disciplinary case into a separate line item. It's item 3.
There's
So,
clemencies.
so I think I understand what the VC is saying, and I think maybe that's what it should then say. So then, like it's being written now, and make recommendations on the granting of amnesty in the future.
On the granting of amnesty.
Because for me, I'm uncomfortable with the fact that it can be read in those, it can be used, for example, to create something or to clamp down on that. But if you just wanted a way forward on things like clemency, then that's what you should just say.
Well, it wasn't quite as narrow as that, but yeah. I mean, it was also on
What are we-
special disciplinary tribunals,
Yes,
for example.
yes, yes.
So, I mean, so done all of those things. So I don't know why you wanted
Can
to
we-
do this all, but anyway. You can make submissions.
Does that then capture or does that
No.
go
Yeah,
over?
to make submissions.
So you've got to go, I mean, you've got you made submissions on
Going back on this.
clemencies granted, and you make recommendations you've got of converting
Converting
clemencies into amnesty.
Into amnesties. Is that the sentiment? Does that capture it? Simon?
Wait, don't
Wait,
delete it.
just undo.
You've
Just
done-
fine. Just fine.
you
It's right.
deleted
It's
too.
just what we see. But that one presupposes amnesty is already granted. So let's just undo the delete again.
Undo the delete again.
Control Z.
Control Z, yeah. Can you make the point meanwhile?
No, I'm saying that's fine if it was.
Oh.
Yeah.
But in the sentence won't make sense.
No, it will still make sense. Maybe just remove granted. Oh, yeah, that's fine. They can leave it there.
Okay. So it reads, invite submission from all constituencies on the clemencies granted and make recommendations on converting clemencies into amnesty or the continuation of clemency and what the nature of these amnesties will be.
Yeah.
Is that,
Yeah.
is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on. The IRCT Shackville TRC will make recommendations on how to deal with the outstanding cases in the spirit of restorative justice. Is that okay?
Yeah.
4,
As a
inform
head,
itself.
As a hint. So I've just got to feedback, and I know this is not, it's a contested area, but I mean that statement comes out of the section on page 2C there, and it's sort of a selective extraction of what has been taken from that. So the first part of it is on the acceptable forms of protest. So I went back to Senate to ask them for where Senate stood on this issue.
Sorry, where are you reading?
So it's under,
C.
so point
Point C.
3 on the right, okay,
from
comes from
contract,
page
not
2,
agreement.
point C on the left, okay? It's the last sentence from that phrase. And the preceding sentence on that talks about making recommendations on acceptable forms of protest. And I polled Senate on that because I wanted to get a sense where Senate stood on that. And Senate was very firm that it did want the IRTC to advise on what acceptable forms of protest were. So I need to report that back to this group. So I'm
Okay,
worried that there's
that's
selective taking of that paragraph and not the full paragraph.
Satya, response to this. We had deliberated this in great depth in the previous sitting on what acceptable forms of protest are, which we do know. You write a petition, you pick it, you stand with the black card, right? That's an acceptable form of protest. It is trite to ask the Commission to reiterate the law or reiterate what's understood in a normal, you know what, if you like, if you're just protesting, then hey. So we had deliberated this and drafted it, and we had agreed to delete that within the meeting of the steering committee. And that meeting with the steering committee was much greater and broader here. I think then that if we're not to reverse that decision, a minuted decision, it will become a tad bit problematic. Because then what it's going to do, we're going to bring the conversation which I had in the steering committee now, when the last scrum is to live in 3 minutes. So no.
You were second and then Visimet.
Yeah, I think actually the best way to deal with this thing is to just be democratic. We have decided, very much majority of this committee that we don't want that to be there. It can be noted, however, if you feel like it, that Senate felt as if that it's still something that can be there, but the number of people in the committee felt that they don't agree with this thing. It's just, we don't have.
Okay. Max?
Chair, I want more for the question of record. I don't think that the last steering committee agreed to remove that clause. We debated it extensively, but I don't think that the minutes show that we agreed to remove it. Now, that's not, I'm not making that point because I want to put it in. I'm making that point to be accurate about what was reported as having been discussed and rejected. We've got the minutes in front of, I don't know if everyone's got the minutes, but I also want to give an example of why I think the response given by Senator Polo, which I responded to, and it's in the minutes from the previous meeting, which is, yes, certain forms of protest are clearly legal. Standing on the side of a road with a poster is legal. Certain other forms are clearly unacceptable, illegal. Burning down a building is illegal, and that's not what we're asking the IRTC to consider. The challenge is that there are a whole lot of grey areas, such as preventing people from writing an exam, obstructing entrance to an exam, which is a form of protest where it's not clearly illegal, it's not in the Constitution, and it's not a trite question, as he put it, to resolve whether it's an acceptable form of protest or not. And given that that was often the form of protest, it seemed appropriate to ask the IRTC, as a group of independent people who think about these things, are involved in social activism or whatever, to say, is this something that the university should tolerate without intervening, or should it intervene? And I think the university is very divided on this. I think the Senate's divided, the community is divided. I am willing not to push for it to be inserted, although I would very much have liked it to be there. But I'm willing not to push for it because I think in some ways it may come about anyway, because when the commissioners are looking at the cases, of the amnesty cases and other cases, they will have to make some sort of judgment about whether this was reasonable or not and what is reasonable, and that we would probably get some view. And also because in a separate process, as we were talking about separate task teams, Senate asked us to produce a document to say what is acceptable protest, and we've done that and we've submitted that to Senate. Senate recommended that that document should be submitted to the IRTC. But if the IRTC doesn't want to hear it, it's fine, they don't need to. And we've also got a council process on looking at guidelines for using private security. So the reason I'm not pushing so hard here is because I think just like those other things, mental health, we didn't sit around doing nothing. Those processes have been proceeding, but I would have thought that's why it is in the agreement, and it was in the agreement because we thought it would be useful for the IRTC to consider it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Max. Kwesi?
Yeah, just a few things in response to this thing that I don't understand why there's a sense that we didn't agree about it. But we spent a long time debating that point. There was a lot of agreement about it. I don't remember you, Max, saying to Russell when he said that that point was not in the spirit of the agreement, saying that it came, in a sense, it might have been in the spirit of the agreement. And part of the reason us having returned to the first initial terms of reference was us saying that nothing that was tabled was actually workable, and that we needed to start from a different point. So my recollection is that we already had that discussion. Now the other problem that I have is why then are we having questions around acceptable forms of protest, whereas how private security, Stephen Ganja, a range of other people handled protests in ways that were also unacceptable. I mean, we have to, part of the broader context needs to consider all of those things. We have to think about why, again, these specific kinds of issues are being tabled from Senate, who also made a very specific or explicit statement that the term decolonization should not be made a part of the terms of reference of discussions in this space because they're potentially dangerous to this institution, which has not been tabled or explained, right? If we want to take it there, then we need to have those discussions, especially since earlier on today, again, the term decolonization was problematized. Am I clear?
No, not clear. But I have the minutes, through you, Chair, I have the minutes, and I can show you where I made the same points in the minutes, as well as the reference to the original agreement. It's not a new idea, it's in the minutes.
What's not a new idea?
You said it wasn't made, you said that in the previous discussion, we didn't make reference to the fact that the original agreement included as a task of the IRTC the question of appropriate, acceptable forms of protest.
You know, the framing of how we manage things, the talk about how we manage, how we frame the boundaries of things, has to do with how, when students, I think in particular, black radical students are acting, we're not presencing the way in which we manage and frame the limits of things around how the other side is actually behaving in relation to students. So the very presencing of students as political agents to be in the way we frame possibility is part of the problem. I don't know whether you get it, Max. I don't know whether you're getting what I'm trying to arrive at.
Yeah, it's going to be allowing too much of a dialogue. Can I please indicate that we're 5 minutes over the time that we had agreed to sit in this meeting? And I can see that there are contentious issues that people want to discuss. But can we try, please, to help this process? You had your hand up.
Yeah. Look, the benefit of live streaming is you can go watch the recording, and it's more accurate than minutes. In fact, you even reached a point where someone, I think it was the chair of council, was the chair of the steering committee, who had agreed in Ndukuhla's point in the last steering committee meeting that we can't be held hostage by Senate's objections to the terms of reference. There was a point that was explicitly made, and there was no contention around and accepting that just because one constituency vehemently disagrees with a particular term of reference, that doesn't mean that this entire process must be held to hostage. There was something which was agreed upon. It may not be minuted, but you can definitely go and watch the recording of that, and it is far more accurate, I'd imagine, than the minutes that you have. So that's the one issue. In terms of like debating the merits of the inclusion of the term of reference itself, again, I'd agree largely with Kwesi, in the sense that there's a particular reason why Senate is pushing for this particular term of reference. Again, I said this in the last. There are particular reasons why certain individuals want to have certain terms of reference included in the steering committee, and you mustn't shy away from that fact. And I'd also agree that it makes the scales uneven in the sense that it makes certain outcomes more likely than other outcomes in terms of what the commissioners are going to recommend as future practices in dealing with protests. No one is saying how management must, no one is looking at the opposite side of the scale in that context. And it is unfair to give that issue more priority when it comes to the term of reference, rather treat it equally as any other submission that is going to be heard by the commissioners. We are happy to give you tons of submissions about the chief investigation officer and all of those other things, and how and private security and all of that as part of any other submission in the steering committee. I don't know why we're giving undue preference to this particular segment of the university community, which is Senate.
Okay, you had your hand up and you had your hand up there.
I mean, just to echo Kwesi and Simon's point, I mean, it's difficult to create frameworks of acceptable forms of protest in what is a fluid sort of environment where it's unacceptable. The lived conditions that we have in the environment are unacceptable. And yet we want to have a rigid framework of acceptable forms of protest. Hence why Simon's saying that, can we put the same amount of importance that we're putting on that point with regards to changing the environment that we exist within, so that then that framework of acceptable forms of protest can't be so rigid. So if the environment changes at the same pace, then we won't be required to have a rigid set of acceptable forms of protest, because the environment will have changed consistently within the IRTC process. So I think if we can understand what we meant when we proposed this entire process conceptually, we'll understand that we're not trying to develop means of limiting how the responses, how students or workers respond to what's happening in the institution, and then trying to limit that accordingly with regards to what's acceptable and legality, but understanding the socio-economic context that informs actions as well. Sure. So in thinking about our submissions and the terms of reference, we must understand the TRC at a conceptual level, and then we'll not have the pulling in different directions as well. And I think also we mustn't be held ransom by Senate, of course, because we're keeping on repeating on the same issue.
Thank you very much. There are two hands, and then I'm going to close this.
I mean, I think we could close this now, because I heard the VC say he's not going to push that this must be in. I didn't hear the Senate, I think the Senate rep had to say that this is what Senate, she reported back to us. She's not saying they're going to walk out of the whole, I don't think, they're going to walk out of the whole thing if it's not in there. And I don't think there's anybody else pushing for it, so I think we should move on
Can we?
and not have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I suggest, because we've way over the time, we have dealt with 4, 5, 6. I'm sure there could be a refinement, but that's what we have agreed. I don't think make recommendations, the last point was taken out. And so that is the terms of reference. Are we done?
Yeah. Yeah.
The last point is taken out?
There was some suggestion on the 18 months.
On the 18 months, yes, there was something around the 18 months. Do we leave 18 months as is, or?
But is it not taken out?
No,
Why
it's
did-
still there.
It's still
It's
there.
still there.
Since 2015.
Yes. Since beginning of the year.
Huh? Since beginning of 2015, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, is that okay, students?
Yeah.
If it's reframed as since beginning of 2008 and 15?
Can we just say that have been raised over the years?
Yeah.
Over the years,
Yeah.
over the
Okay,
years.
all
That
right.
is way much
Yeah.
better than
Okay.
limiting it.
Okay.
It's like the South African
Red
Truth
line
and
mindful
Reconciliation Commission started in 1961, as if apartheid started in 1961, which was problematic. Raised over there? Huh?
Over the years.
Over the years, full stop. Or you may, okay. And you? Yeah. It's your turn.
Yes.
Lorna.
So I just, thank you, Chair, for recognizing me. I wanted to, as the last point, I know it was raised before, but just for clarity, are we attaching the alumni submission as
There was
an
a
addendum on-
recommendation that the alumni submissions be attached to the terms of reference. Is that okay with the House?
Yeah.
Chair, it opens up a question if others wish to have their submissions attached. This is to go to the commissioners, isn't that so?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it really a submission to the commissioners? In the same way that others might make submissions.
Submissions to the Commission.
Is it appropriate to, I mean, that was never offered to others as an option, other stakeholders, to say, make something which could be submitted as part of the terms of reference. It gives it a different status.
Okay.
And I just think that it's a very appropriate submission if you go in immediately, but I worry that we're opening something which other stakeholders will legitimately say, well, we also want to have our view expressed as part of the approach to the term.
That sounds a little unfair, Max, because the submission was made more than one. I mean, it's been on the table, and it's not been included in the actual discussions, but that was the intention of the submission. So that actually it is recognized as part of the frame and the thinking of the overarching process of the IRTC, as opposed to that it is a specific submission to the IRTC, and that's the, I think that's the difference.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Lona's sentiments in that if you read the document Lona is referring to, it's a long list, so we could have debated that as like terms of reference to include, and we just have like 100 list of terms of reference, and it made more sense to just attach that as an addendum. And also because, again, some of the concerns which may be brought by students may in future just be attached to that addendum. So it makes more sense, as opposed to opening up the terms of reference and closing and reopening them. Just attach it to the fixed terms of reference.
Simon, you're the last person to speak.
I'm not disagreeing with anything, right? I agree with everything you said. But I just need assistance in this. It's an extract from the alumni document. And they've put it there as a terms of reference because it gives a fundamental point to the TRC itself, or the TRC itself in terms of teeth. So it reads, I'm not sure whether I could call it terms of reference, but I don't think it's a point that you can just leave out in the air. In addition to inviting submissions, blah, blah, from all constituencies, the IRTC should have the authority to call upon specific individuals or structures to make submissions appear before it, right? I don't think we can assume that. It's too much of a fundamental point. Otherwise, Senator will just not otherwise, X will just not to come to appear before it. Then the entire process is defeated. So, I'm not sure whether calling the term of reference or you're just saying this is the power that the committee has. So I need assistance from this house in terms of where do you put that. So it's said, in addition to inviting submissions from all constituencies, the IRTC should have the authority to call upon specific individuals or structures to make submissions or appear before it.
Is that not covered in 95 of
Where?
in terms of reference?
Where is it? No, it's not. So here, so the fundamental point here is you've got. So it's like when it calls you, you must come before it. That's the point it makes.
Oh, so
not
you're asking, is it a power subpoena?
Yeah, the power subpoena. I'm saying like
yeah,
where
okay.
do you add that?
Yeah. Okay. Max, do you have an?
Well, I don't know if Loretta maybe has the answer, but our understanding is that the nature of this structure would not be able. We would not be able to give it that power.
Yeah.
It's not a legal or court-established structure that can insist that people should appear.
Yeah.
For better or worse, I mean, obviously for worse in our sense that we would want this to be as productive as possible by having everyone's there. But there will be people who probably reject the idea of this or who feel maybe that they're too exposed. And so we don't have a power of subpoena,
Okay.
I'm afraid.
Can I suggest?
Basically the power of persuasion.
Can I just suggest a way forward? Because I keep on looking at him and I know he's looking at me and thinking time. Can I say that we agree that we've got the terms of reference as they are? And of course, the steering committee still is there to debate issues that come up, because I'm worried that if we open the discussion on the powers of subpoena and all of that, that may derail this process. We're entering into a discussion that will take much more time than we have. Not unless people have got other ideas.
Yeah. So the critical components in the document that was submitted is actually the principles that underpin the work that needs to go in. Having spent the whole day looking at the terms of reference, I think the elements around the terms of reference in that document probably could then get taken away and the principles in that document be what is retained and attached. Because those are the elements that have not been contributed to these terms of reference, which are critical to the work that needs to go going forward.
Okay. Is that agreed?
I think it just needs to be signalled that that is the submission of the alumni, that it wasn't discussed, and it doesn't therefore come with the stamp of approval of the whole steering committee. Maybe no one has any disagreement with it, but it isn't something that's been discussed, and I think there will be people who would say that's one perspective and it's not necessarily shared. So if it's attached and said this was the alumni submission and we want the and it goes with the terms of reference, I'm happy. But it's different from being endorsed by the steering committee in the same way that the terms of reference have been endorsed, because we really haven't discussed it.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I find this is like a classic UCT behavior. This is why we're having this process. Because the thing is in front of us, but we don't want to look at it, so we don't look at it. And then we come to the end and we say we never discussed it, so we can't decide on it. I mean, it's just actually outrageous.
Well, what do you suggest? That we should just say yes, we accept it, but we haven't discussed it, or should we have another day to discuss it? I'm trying to find a way forward, but
Well, I heard
agree with you. We didn't
I
have
heard two
time.
people today say, Sidankolo and Edwina, that could we attach this to the document? Bully has now suggested let's just work with the principles. So I'm hearing that there's a lot of support for it. People have had it, they've read it, they've had an opportunity to think about it. You personally told me that you thought it was a good thing for us to incorporate. So, I mean, I just find this to be quite...
so I'm making a process point. I'm accepting that it should go to the commissioners with the terms of reference, but it should signal that this is not something that was discussed in the steering committee or endorsed. I think otherwise it's just not honest. We haven't done it. We could spend another few hours talking about it.
I don't think we have. I mean, it's either there's an agreement that this happens or there's another discussion, because I think now we're skating on thin ice with regards to time.
Yeah, I mean, my compromise is that this committee agreed that the alumni submission or the alumni document be attached as an appendix to the terms of reference. So it's saying this came from the alumni, it's saying we as a group agreed it would be there, and it's all there. We don't cherry pick which parts of it we want or not.
Yes.
So if there was an agreement, then that should be easy.
Yeah, that's cool.
Check. I disagree.
There's a difference from it being an appendix and it having the same weight as the terms of reference. I think that's the point of like where we're clashing here. Because if it's just an attached thing that we say it came from the Black alumni, we haven't resolved whether it can dictate the process of the TRC or whether it can inform the discussion within it and all of these things. So it just being an addendum, saying, okay, look, the House agrees, we can have this thing as something attached that just came from the Black alumni, it doesn't have the same weight as those terms of reference. Like the alumni, apologies.
Suggestion, Chair.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
As a way
Check.
forward,
Oh.
can
Yeah,
we
the
just
way
say
forward.
that, can we have like 5 minutes on the agenda of the IRTC steering committee then, if they then want to have this decision, because like time is, so as a way forward, if there's some uncertainty of whether or not we agree or not, I don't,
Yeah.
I thought that was an issue. In our meeting, can we just have 5 minutes to just then vote on it if this is a matter of let's vote, but not here, we're done, I think.
Can we then close the meeting?
We happy to accept Debbie's
But in the
proposal.
meantime,
They're happy to accept Debbie's proposal. Is that cool with everybody? I mean, if the alumni who drafted the document are fine with that, then I think we should accept it as is. Is that okay? If it's okay, I just want to, the thing that I've noticed is that on the selection procedure, the time frames haven't, I thought we would have time, but I think that will take us more time to work on that. At least you've got the terms of reference and you've got the selection criteria, and then you can move forward to at least then put time frames and stuff.
There was one point on the selection criteria with reference to legal expertise, and you said you're going to put a question mark, and
Oh,
we'll come
yes.
back to that. That was a very critical point of the
The
selection.
legal,
Yeah,
yeah, I remember now, sorry.
yeah.
I think I move that we should accept it as it is. We need
Ideally, the commission should include at least one person with legal expertise, e.g. a judge, with an appreciation for social justice and transformative constitutionalism. Is that okay?
But again, I don't know if you will, the simple concern was that there's a particular authority that the invoking of legal language carries. So recommendations coming, and the fact that we are expressly stating that the commission must have at least one person with this legal background,
Yeah.
it gives a certain degree of power to that commissioner and that particular recommendation. And you can't mitigate that just by saying we're going to include a whole bunch of other experts, for example, people with disabilities, etc. That language and those like a sociologist doesn't invoke the same degree of influence as a legal expert, because people respect that kind of power and authority. So again, the simple concern was by expressly including the criteria, you're giving it under a preference, and the effect of that is it gives an undue preference. The effect of which is to undermine recommendations which may come from other
I
commissions.
disagree.
Yeah.
I must disagree. Really.
Yeah, okay, there's a disagreement, and I really think,
I disagree.
We are now opening a debate on a
Can
question.
we can leave it as
I-
it is.
We can leave it as it is. Are we in agreement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I would like to close the meeting as the chair and thank Fundo and everybody else very much.
No, Simon.
One point.
Is it acceptable if we circulate with the criteria a time frame that people can comment on for submission of nominations?
So
If
officially
we
now we can submit
if we're not
nominations.
going to discuss it now,
Yeah.
so can we, for example, on Monday circulate this and say within 10 days, and people tell us no, within 20 days?
Okay, can I say thank you to all of you, in particular thanks to the live streaming and to the translators, and thank you very much.
Thank you to you, Nkundo.
Thank you to you.
Did someone thank Nkundo? Did you thank Nkundo? I didn't hear. Did you thank